And record. I am so excited today. I'm Kristine Cooper, mortgage planner at Finance of America, and today I have a speaker on today. If I can go ahead and share my screen, we'll go ahead and get some information up here too. So today I have Kristine Young here with me today. She's attorney at law, focuses on family law, and so I'm super excited to have you here today. I know that you are super busy, so I appreciate your time, and I thank you for being here. I really just wanted to kind of dive in here. I'm a certified divorce lending professional. I work a lot in that arena, as you know, and so I really just wanted to give some content information. I'm always big on educating others so that they can make the best decisions possible. And I think just really having some education around family law is really important. I know a lot of my clients that call just have no clue. Like, what do I do? What are my options? And so giving a little bit more background around that so that they can make an educated decision on what to do, I think is really important. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think that what you're talking about is so important too, because I think that there's such an unknown going into every process that to have some general context and like an outline of what to expect really helps people make the most informed choices that are going to be so impactful for everything about their future, whether it's financial or interpersonal relationships, etc. So I think it's a service that you are providing for sure.
Great. Well, maybe if you can tell me a little bit around what is family law. When someone's, we're talking about family law, but what does that mean? What is family law, and what services are provided within that arena?
So family law encompasses a lot of things. I think the typical go-to for most people would be that it is divorce, right? So family law encompasses dissolution or divorce, which is the same thing. It also encompasses all aspects of child custody. So for people who are unmarried, who have children and need to figure out a custodial schedule or child support, that's all within the divorce and family law context. It can encompass guardianships or grandparent visitation. It can encompass step-parent adoptions. So really anything that has to do with the well-being of children or the division of assets from a marriage, all of those fall in that arena of family law. So those are all things that the court can assist with if parties are unable to reach agreements by themselves.
And so you can kind of do those separately. So you don't have to be going through a divorce to be able to address maybe court or not child, custody. That could be completely separate, correct?
Right. So, and not everyone who is getting child custody orders is going through a divorce. So people who are unmarried who have children will still need the assistance to figure out a schedule if they're unable to come up with one on their own. So the court is supposed to be a resource for people if they're unable to reach agreements. By all means, it's completely encouraged that people work things out themselves because you're more likely to follow agreements that you guys have chosen for yourselves than being told what to do by a judge. So that's always the preferable method. But regardless, the court is there to offer assistance. And particularly with children involved, there are additional resources that the court offers. So for example, we have child custody recommended counseling. Generally speaking, people just call it mediation, which is a resource that the court offers to every family. So if you were to go to court and say, hey, judge, I'm having a problem figuring out my schedule for my children with my spouse, they would automatically refer the entire family to a court-appointed mediator who's going to work with the family to try to come up with the best possible schedule based on that family's specific circumstances. Children do participate if they're over 5. Their degree of participation varies depending on their age and maturity level, but really the court tries to take a very holistic approach as to what's best for the children, and that can take input from the whole family. So there are people who are trained to assist families and to work with them in order to come up with what makes the most sense for that particular situation.
Yeah, I think that's really important for people to understand. I know that a lot of my clients are, at the very beginning stages when I talk to them, they own a home, they're like, okay, well, I'm thinking about filing for divorce. My spouse doesn't know. I just need to understand the process. So can you kind of give just a brief overview? I know there's a million different avenues that one can take, but in an ideal situation, can you give a brief outline of what someone would want to do or start if that's something that they're considering?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that that's probably your best place to start, because I think that you can't make decisions about where you're going unless you kind of have a roadmap as to what to expect, right? So whenever people are calling my office to say, hey, I think that this might be a path I'm going towards, what we do is we walk them through the entire process from start to finish, just so you have like a bird's eye view of what you're going to be experiencing and looking down at. So I always try to break it down in its simplest form, is that the process runs in 3 main steps. So in every case, somebody has to open a case with the court, and that's filing a petition. All that's doing in layman's terms is really identifying for the court the potential issues that a judge could assist parties with if you guys couldn't do it on your own. There are only a limited number of things the court addresses, so it's broken down into categories. So the court can address custody, they can address visitation, they can address child support, spousal support, property division, and attorney's fees. So those are the 6 topics that are before the court for assistance if parties can't do it on their own. So a petition is filed. All that really does is open a case with the court. It's not going to give you a court date in most counties. The judge doesn't make decisions based on that filing. It just puts everyone on notice as to what the big issues are and gets a case number assigned and gets you guys started in the process. So that's step 1, is filing it. It does have to be served on the other person. So a lot of times people will file and think that their case has started simply because they've dropped some paperwork off to the court. That is not the case. You actually have to give notice to the other side. So in order for the clock to really start running, you need to deliver that paperwork to the other person so that they know that paperwork has been filed. And then their step 1 on the other side is to file a response, which is a mirrored pleading that says, I agree that these are the 6 issues or 5 issues that are before the court. So that's step 1 in every case. Step 2 is doing disclosure documents, and that's probably the most important part of the case financially. Disclosures are court forms that they provide for parties to fill out, and each person has to fill out their own set of forms. The first is an income declaration, which goes through your current employer, your sources of income, if there's any retirement or investment funds or rental properties, basically anywhere that you're pulling income from gets disclosed. And then it also walks through a monthly budget, because people are separating from 2 households into 1, and that's something that they need to start thinking about, is how am I going to budget in this new phase of life that I'm entering into. So each person completes the financial declaration regarding their income. And then there's also a disclosure document called a schedule of assets and debts. And what that is an itemized listing of everything that's owned by the parties. So it's going to be categorized, and it has categories for bank accounts, for credit cards, for retirement accounts, for investment accounts, for homes, for personal property. Basically everything you can think of is going to be categorized there, and it gets filled in so that everybody knows what exists. And that's particularly important because we are a community property state. So California's community property, and what that means is, absent a few exceptions, everything that's acquired from the time the parties marry until they separate is going to be community property, and it's going to be subject to equal division. So I always tell people, yes, the retirement account may be in your name, but if those funds were contributed during marriage, that's still community property and subject to division. Same thing with vehicles. Somebody may have bought a vehicle and put title only in their name, but if that vehicle was purchased during marriage, it's still a community property vehicle, and we're still subjecting it to division when we look at the overall assets and debts and how it gets allocated to each party. So that's step 2, is coming up with all the financial information to disclose to the other person. It's also important because not everyone shares accounts, right? So some people will have their own checking account, but they'll have a joint account with their spouse. Some people have different investments accounts where the other spouse may not necessarily have access to those records. So that's why the disclosures become so important, because it basically puts all the cards on the table so everybody knows what is subject to division, what does the whole marital estate look like, how can we be creative in offsetting the division of assets if certain things are more of a priority to people than to others. So you raised an example earlier where you said someone's worried about the house. That's their first question, what do I do with the house? So that's something that we look at with this schedule of assets and debts, whereas if somebody's goal is to maintain the family residence, well, that's a joint asset. And if you were to sell it, you guys would net, I'm just going to use random numbers. If they were going to net 100,000 from the sale, well, then their spouse would have received 50,000. And if you're going to keep the house, you need to come up with 50,000 in some other asset to give the spouse in order to equalize that offset and that division of you keeping the home. So that's why those disclosures become so important, because then we can look at how do we shift things around and where do we put them so that everybody gets what's most important to them, but still walks away with a fair division of assets. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think yeah, no, it totally makes sense. And I love that you pointed that out, because a lot of times I get clients that'll reach out to me because I am, a certified divorce lender, but I'm not an attorney. And so they'll ask questions where they'll be like, well, if I split this, then, that means that the house is mine and all of our assets are divided, and they think automatically that, and I explain to them, no, there's no one way of doing anything. That's what you guys have to agree to, and whatever, if you can't come to an agreement with the court, what the court deems fair. So, and I explain, you really need to work with an attorney. A lot of people want to do it themselves because they think that they're saving so much more money versus using an attorney. And I'll tell you, 9 times out of 10, I mean, I know you say it on your side, I'm sure, but for me, not being an attorney, I could say it 9 times out of 10, they end up spending way more money and losing so much more because they don't have the representative that knows what's fair or what's right, or, the backgrounds of what needs to be done. So I know it's an investment up front, but it ends up saving so much more money down the road. And so that's why I also wanted to do this video. Is it's hard. You're so emotional when you're in that moment too, and you think more loss. I think that it's just, I don't want to lose more. And that's a normal feeling. We all, all would feel that way. I've been through a divorce, so I know how it feels on that side. That's why I'm in, a divorce lender. But I think it's really important to step back and look logically. What makes sense and what do I need right now, especially when I'm emotional, to keep that in perspective. So I think it's important to know that there's no one way. It just, it's a whole puzzle that you need help, from someone that knows how to put that puzzle together. So I think that's great.
I think that you raise a really good point too, in that sometimes people agree to things in a vacuum, right? So at the beginning, everyone may be on the same page that yes, one person's
Right.
going to keep the home and then the other, we'll figure out everything later. And while that's perfectly fine if you guys stay on the same page, one of the biggest pitfalls I see is that people are in agreement about one asset, but then when it comes down to the rest of them, they're no longer in agreement. And if you've already taken action on that first part, it becomes much more complicated to undo, as opposed to looking at your division of assets as a whole. Because I mean, from a negotiation standpoint too, if that's a priority to someone, you should be getting something that's a priority to you in return, right? And not necessarily, well, it didn't bother me to just let them have the house. That's great, but it may bother them to give you half their retirement, and you don't know that that landmine is coming up in the future because you're looking at things just as an individual asset as opposed to a complete picture. So I really discourage anybody who talks to me. I say, you can't possibly reach agreements until you've done all those disclosures, until you've completed step 2, because you can't know what you're agreeing to without knowing the entire context of what you're working with.
Right.
So that's
Right.
really critical, that step 2. And that kind of segues right into step 3 of a divorce, which is, in a perfect world, you would get those disclosures exchanged. You would look at everything. And if you guys were on the same page, you would divide everything equitably, write it up, sign off and say, yep, we each agree. I'm keeping this, he's keeping that. We're in perfect agreement. Here's how we're going to divide everything. The balance line is equitable. We're okay with this. And if you're able to do that, you send that into the judge signs off, and you're done. So if you've reached full agreements, you'll never step foot in a courthouse. You'll never have to talk to a judge. You're not going to go to a trial. You're just going to have those agreements formalized into a court order so that going forward, it's clear who belongs to what, and if any transfers of title need to take place, that can happen. But that's, the perfect scenario is that's what happens. And even if things aren't equitable, if parties agree, the court will approve it. So they don't care. They're not going to look at your balance sheet and make sure everything's the same. They say, if you guys have reached agreements, we're going to honor those agreements that you have reached, and we're going to sign off on them. So that's how you get kind of through the process. If you're on the same page and if you guys can work together, that's going to get you through with the least amount of hassle. If you aren't able to reach agreements, then the court's going to start weighing in when you ask for assistance. And I think that's the other thing that people don't realize that's really important to highlight, is that the court does not hold parties' hands through the process. So they're never going to do anything on your behalf. They're never going to schedule you court dates. They're never going to raise issues and point out that you haven't addressed something. The court's expectation is that if you need help, that you have to come and ask for assistance from the court. So a lot of times people will come to me because they've been working with their spouse for a year trying to reach agreements, and then it's forestalled. And they say, hey, you know, I want spousal support for the last year. I want child support for the last year. I want this and that. And we can't do that. So you have to tell the court that you want something, because we have this concept of giving notice where the other side can't be penalized for not having done something if they weren't aware that you were requesting it. So we don't get to go back in time. We go from the time that you give notice and the time you ask the court for help is the time that they will make decisions on a go forward basis. And I'm kind of giving really broad strokes. There are, of course, exceptions in the law that allows us to retroactively apply certain things. But the takeaway that I really want to stress is that you have to ask for help from the court before you will receive it. So I think that's something that, you know, one of the other kind of major things we run into that I think is important to just highlight is people who already have child support orders in place and lose a job. Your child support obligation doesn't stop. Even though your income upon which that child support amount was determined is no longer there, you have to tell the court. And that's the other really big thing that we see with people is that they'll be out of a job for a year, finally get a new job making less, and they want to recompute child support at their lower income, and then they want the court to wipe out everything from the past year because they didn't have an income. And the court is barred from doing that because you didn't give notice. They can only work on a go forward basis. So really, it's so critical that if something major happens, that you consult with attorney, or you let the court know, or you ask for a review and update, because they're not going to do it on their own, and they're not going to be sympathetic to a lapse of time, even if it's to someone's detriment, and even if it doesn't seem fair. The court says you have to give notice, and you have to put everyone, you know, on alert that these are things that you are asking for.
That's really important, especially right now with everything going on. There's so many people that are unemployed and probably don't even realize that they need to go through that process, you know, because maybe they didn't go to an attorney, or they're not working with an attorney that's letting them know. So that's huge. You know, one of the questions I was going to ask is, what is the biggest mistakes? And really, I think it's just not being educated and not properly disclosing, it sounds like, around any of that. So that's huge. And then what's one piece of advice that you feel everyone should know about family, like family law in general? Why is it important, and why would it be important to go that direction with working with the family law?
Yeah, I think transparency is really the best advice I can give. I think, you know, my philosophy is that the more people can cooperate, the smoother the whole process is going to go, right? So there are certainly different ways to approach family law. People can be very litigious about it. They can be very cooperative. They can work with a mediator where they're sitting in a room with one joint neutral person. But I think from my perspective, the best thing you can do for yourself is to be transparent, because the more that you have to engage with attorney, the more that you have to try to hunt for information, the more costs are going to increase on both sides. So like, it's really common, we do something called discovery in family law, which just means like the disclosure of information. So discovery is typically somebody asking for records. So bank statements, credit card statements, you know, copies of bills, so they know if your budget that you've detailed is an accurate reflection. And that's time intensive, paperwork heavy, all those things, where if people were just forthcoming and you put all the information on the table, you're going to save money in the long run, because nobody's having to hunt for the information to come up with a complete picture. And I think people are really distrustful, understandably so, when they enter this process, and they get into a competition of, well, if they're not going to do it, I'm not going to do it. And if they're going to make me, you know, go through the hoops of subpoenaing the bank account, I'm going to do the same thing. And that's certainly people's prerogative to approach it however they want. And that's certainly not legally wrong. But all it does is increase cost and animosity in an already really tense situation where everyone is, you know, trying their best to just get through it. And I think that if you can approach it with a degree of trust with your attorney, that they are advocating for you and that you are supposed to provide all the information willingly and voluntarily, it's going to go so much smoother for everyone involved.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just working with the right attorneys. I mean, I know a ton of divorce attorneys, and a lot of them, you know, I wouldn't say a lot, but many I wouldn't recommend, because they're not really there for their clients, and you can really feel that they're not. That's why I love you guys. You guys are amazing, and I think that you really go above and beyond for your clients, which is huge. And I think that, you guys are really big about educating yourself on a lot of different facets to help the client. So, I mean, obviously having the relationship with a mortgage planner to make sure, yeah, it's great that you want the home, but can you qualify? Is this feasible? Let's make sure first, do we need to restructure the way that you're paid support to make sure you can qualify for the home? A lot of other attorneys don't even take the time to do that. They don't care enough to do that.
And I think that's such a good point, Kristen. And like, I'm in court right now on that exact issue where I have an opposing spouse who wants to keep the home. And there's no way, like as a layperson, I can look at the finances and say, there's just no way you're going to qualify. Your work history is not there. Your income's not there. There's a support award that you're paying. And I have begged the other side, and he has an attorney, to please go consult with a mortgage planner, go talk to someone so that we don't fight over an issue that's a non-issue. Like the end is inevitable.
Right.
No one can afford to keep this home on one income. But because they are not educating themselves, we are churning fees for no reason, in my opinion. Like it's inevitable, it's gonna be sold, and we're just delaying it for, I don't even know what. And it's really sad to see that, because the first thing I tell people in consults when they tell me they want to keep a home is you've got to go talk to someone. You need to see if you qualify. You will know within a couple of days at most whether this is an option for you. And I think it's really hard because people make decisions from such an emotional place, right? Like there's attachments for all different reasons, but it gets worse. The longer we go through this process and the more attached you are to that idea of maintaining a family home, is only going to make the letdown so much worse. And then it's going to raise the animosity even higher when they blame the other side for, well, if you weren't making me sell the home, then we wouldn't be in this position and our kids and yada, 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 yada. And you've got to set those expectations up front. So, you are an invaluable asset in that sense. And like people just need to really utilize the resources at their disposal. And I think that's really one of the biggest pitfalls is people not being aware of the big picture and like, yes, this is something that is a goal of yours, but is it a reality? Is it practical? Is it feasible? Does it even make sense? Like, even if you can afford it, are you going to be operating within such a small margin of error of your budget that if some sort of disaster hits, like the present circumstances,
that's the biggest thing is, I mean, I'll run numbers for clients and they're just shocked because they're just not, they didn't do the finances most of the time, or even if they did, they just didn't realize that it would be so much more because now they have less equity and all the things that are involved. And, it really is a conversation. If I know how much this home means to you, and I know having the instability of having to find another home is just not something you want to face, but the cost is more. And so really just having that conversation with them where they can look at it as a positive, like it's a fresh start, it's a good move, is another important thing that you get when you have a team of people that care. And that's really where I'm going with it is, your partner, Heather Mayer, that's there too, and we could talk briefly on her, and I'll show your website that I have here. You guys really care about your clients, and you're going to do whatever it takes. And maybe talk a little bit about how the collaborative, maybe talk about your involvement with collaborative. I know we didn't touch on that, and I think that's huge, and that's something that you guys have experience with that a lot of attorneys just don't care enough to have experience with, and I think it's huge.
Yeah, so I kind of highlighted the most familiar approach to family law, right, which is like a traditional litigation model, which if we're looking at the spectrum, it's on the far end of probably the worst way you can get through a divorce is through the traditional litigation model. And unfortunately, it is the most common model that people are familiar with and go through. Kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum is mediation, which is a joint neutral mediator working with both parties to try to help facilitate a resolution. With a mediator, it's not somebody who's representing either party, so they are not an advocate for either person. We would still recommend, when we do mediation, we still recommend people go consult with an attorney once they've reached their agreements, just so they know their rights and what they're agreeing to in the mediation context. So that's kind of on the other side of the spectrum. And then kind of right in the middle is the Cadillac of divorce, which would be collaborative divorce. And collaborative is a hybrid model where everyone involved has been trained in mediation. It's a team of professionals who are all working together. So there's a joint neutral financial specialist who's going to help with that step 2 that I was discussing. So the gathering of information about assets and debts, the evaluation of income for each party, what the budgets look like, that's all done by a financial specialist, which I cannot highlight enough, and I try to use them in my litigated cases as well, because one, they're cheaper than attorneys. So you're already getting a cost savings by working with a joint, and then even more because their rate is lower. And that's what they specialize in, right? So like, I can do all this work, but this is somebody whose sole job is to deal with finances and budgets and allocation and, you know, cost planning for the future. Like, they are the ones who are best suited to assist you for that. You're working with coaches for each party, which are really so invaluable. The coaches are mental health professionals who are really there to kind of keep the train on the tracks. And a lot of times, at least in my experience, attorneys end up being de facto therapists. And again, I didn't go to school for that. I didn't go to school to be a therapist, and I'm certainly sympathetic and empathetic and can be there for my clients, and I will absolutely listen, but I am not trained in how to help you navigate the emotional side of getting through this transition, whereas a therapist is. And I think that that's one of the most invaluable resources of collaborative, is that you have someone who's there to kind of ease that transition and guide you through it in a way that an attorney just were not trained to do. And then of course you have attorneys. So just because you're engaging in this mediated or collaborative process, you're still having an advocate in the room with you. And I think that's so important. And then the big difference between collaborative and the litigation model that I described is we avoid court. So the main tenet of collaborative is that you sit in a room with this team and you work it out until you've worked it out. And I think that there is so much incentive because you generate a lot of trust that way. You have people who are trained to work cooperatively. You know, the team that is working with you sets the example. We don't hide anything. So again, like when I was talking about that discovery process earlier and really being forthcoming, that's a tenet of the collaborative process. You put all the cards on the table. Nobody hides anything. If something's needed, somebody goes and gets it. And we really try to make sure that everyone is educated in the same way. So one of the things that I really like about collaborative is that you hear everything in the room together. And that cuts out the game of telephone that builds distrust between parties, because attorneys have different levels of experience. They have different experience with certain judges. They have different experience with certain topics. So my opinion may be that if you go to court on this specific issue, the outcome should be X based on my history and experience of dealing with that issue. And if another attorney has a totally different experience, well, then the clients are going to get different recommendations. And then they're not going to trust each other if they talk to each other separately. And they're going to say, well, my attorney said this. And the other one's going to say, well, my attorney said this. And there's not going to be any meeting of the minds. Where with collaborative, we're going to say all that stuff in the room together. So everyone hears the same things, and that's going to be the things that benefit your side and the things that are detrimental to your side, so that we're all evaluating things within that same realm of information, and nobody's going to be surprised by some piece of information that wasn't disclosed or that their spouse heard that they didn't. Everybody hears all the same thing at the same time, and that is enormous for cutting through a lot of the back and forth that's just going to, again, generate fees and cause increased levels of animosity.
Yeah, I think that's exactly why I love the collaborative practice. It's about keeping the family unit together. And even though you are divorcing, when there's kids involved, it still keeps you to where you can be in a position that you can, impact your kids the least amount as possible, but still work together as parents, which is forever going forward when you have kids, when you're in a divorce. I mean, I know my kids are in, separate homes, so I deal with it. And having that partnership between each other, when you could do it through collaborative, you don't have all the animosity and the fighting that comes from litigation. If you could stay out of litigation, if it's possible to do it within a collaborative or mediation case, you have a better chance of success for your family and your kids. And then also you have kids, there's coaches for kids too, which I think is really important. I know for me, that's my biggest concern, is how are my kids impacted? So if you have coaches that can come in and help you, talk to the kids about what all this means and impact them the least amount of possible, that's huge. And that's why you guys are amazing. Like, you guys just really care about your clients in whatever way. It's not about money. It's about what's going to be the best process that you can manage and be able to go down and help navigate that for them. So I'm just super blessed to be part of you guys. And I always, refer you guys because I think you guys are amazing. So I think for anyone that's looking, into this option, it's unfortunate, but you just want to make sure that you're working with the right people and that you're going down the right process. And so I really encourage people to reach out to you guys and just see what would be the best way for us moving forward, especially if you have kids, to make sure that from the beginning that you're putting it in a position that they're not going to be impacted negatively, you know, as much as possible. So I think that's really important. I put on the screen too, just kind of all the stuff that your firm handles. And then I know I'm going to have Heather on too, and we're going to talk about the estate planning side, which is super awesome. And I think it's really important for people to know too. So I appreciate your time today, and I appreciate you taking the time to go over this so that we can share this with other people so that they can make empowering decisions moving forward.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Anything else that you think that you want to add that we haven't talked about?
I mean, I guess we should probably highlight that you are also collaboratively trained, right? So that's, you know, in that team approach that we're talking about, it includes specialists that get brought in, like you were mentioning, a child specialist who can help facilitate discussions with the children, but people like you who are also invaluable resources get brought into the team approach. So we're not trying to strong arm someone into going and consulting someone. You're brought in immediately, excuse me, so that all the information is there and that's provided. And so I think that's important for people to know, that the resources are made available, and we are so well connected and collaborative that whatever you need, we're going to find you the person who can help with that topic.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's what it is. And that's why I love doing these videos is, I mean, I've been in mortgage for almost 18 years. I'm a mortgage planner. And so I just really like bringing in professionals that I know, like, and trust, that I refer to my clients, because that's super important. Working with the right people is just, it's scary out there, some of the people that are in the business. And so I'm just trying to help navigate. I mean, there's no ties. We don't get kickbacks. We don't get paid for referring business to each other. It's simply because we know it's the best option for our clients. So I love you guys. I thank you for all that you do. And I can't wait until we can actually meet in person again through all this. It's been crazy, but I hope you stay safe and healthy. And thank you for your time today.
Yeah, absolutely, Kristen. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.